pleasure to welcome and be joined by Susan Teckow. Susan, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me okay?
I can, and hopefully you're seeing our slides here.
Indeed.
All right. Well, very good. So Susan and I have had the pleasure of working together now for a while. I got to know Susan through some work with here in Pennsylvania at the state level, and also through the State Jumpstart Coalition. And it's been really fascinating and eye-opening to me. As I say to Susan sometimes, I've lived in the world of financial education for almost 20 years. I'm new to this world of helping serve individuals with disabilities, and this has really been eye-opening to me the more that I've dug into the issue of providing financial education, both in terms of the varied needs of individuals as well as the best ways to go about doing this. So Susan and I have been working collaboratively in this effort, and I've been helping Susan and the Pennsylvania Assistive Technology Foundation to develop some resources for teachers that we're going to make available for next school year. But Susan, would you just give a quick background for our participants?
Sure. So we at the Pennsylvania Assistive Technology Foundation are one of the 36 national alternative financing programs. Every state can have an alternative financing program under the Federal Assistive Technology Act. So as our name says, and many of you teachers will know, assistive technology, whether it's off the shelf or customized, is any device that helps a person with a disability or senior do the things they want to do. So in schools, you'll see iPads, FM systems, wheelchairs, augmentative communication devices, a whole host of things. Our foundation, however, helps people throughout Pennsylvania, all ages, all disabilities, and health condition, all income levels, figure out the best way they can acquire the assistive technology they want. So we talk about existing funding resources, and we have cash loans. It's through that work with cash loans that we started to read a gazillion credit reports, and as previous speakers said, found out people don't have much background in financial education and have never looked at their credit reports. So when we're talking about paying their Verizon bill, there was kind of an empty space. So several years ago, we started to write our own financial education booklet, primarily targeting students with disabilities who are on their way to transitioning to adulthood. So kind of helping out, because we in Pennsylvania, we also think it would be great to have a graduation requirement that everyone has personal finance. I'm also the parent of a 35-year-old who has cerebral palsy and went through the school system here in Lower Merion, and I also have a younger daughter who has significant learning disabilities and also went through the school systems, and neither of them had any financial education. So we know this material is important.
Thanks so much, Susan. So we're going to talk a little bit today first about the why and why you need to adapt your financial literacy and financial education lessons. And then we'll also turn then to how. So, what is it that you need to do to try and adapt those? So we came up with 5 reasons to adapt. There certainly could be more. We just wanted to try and hone in on ones that we thought were key reasons to adapt financial education lessons for those with disabilities. And so you'll see here we have the fact that there are asset limits for government benefits. There are some disability-specific needs for individuals. There's also an important role of personal and financial caregivers to consider. There are special assistance programs that individuals with disabilities may qualify for, and then we wanted to address the issue of sort of unique family circumstances. And so we're going to go through these one by one. So starting with asset limits for government benefits. So Susan, can you just first tell our audience, what are asset limits, and give us maybe some examples of limits for specific benefits?
Sure. There are three basic programs, government programs, that people with disabilities and their families may or may not be eligible for based on asset limits. So what are they? It's the amount of money you either receive every month, that you save, or that you have. So for example, for supplemental security income, SSI, you can have no more than $2,000 in your checking and savings accounts, plus one home and one car. For the home and community-based waiver programs, the asset limit is a little higher, and that is you can have a total of $8,000 in your checking and savings accounts, and one home and one car. And of course, then there are some of the other programs, LIHEAP, which is energy assistance. It looks on family, household income, and food stamps, also household income. And there are asset limits, so income limits.
Very good. So, with asset limits, they're there for a reason, right? The government doesn't want to provide benefits to individuals who don't really need them, but they also act as this disincentive for people to save. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. They are, however, all the asset limits are very, very low, so that the government programs are really going to support the very poor of the very poor. One of the issues is those asset limits have not been raised in years and years and years. So for example, for supplemental security income, in order for you to be eligible for SSI, a person has to have a significant disability and have no more, as I said, $2,000 in their name, and only one car, one home, and their SSI in Pennsylvania with the state supplement is only $733. So it's still not much money, but it is some money as opposed to having zero income. But kind of going into where this is leading, many financial education programs, and certainly those by banks and credit unions, part of their message is save for the future. And yet if you save and don't know how to save wisely, you can go over your asset limit and therefore break off your guaranteed income of either SSI or food stamps or your home and community-based waiver programs.
So I think one of the points of this is that it really makes us rethink some of those pay yourself first lessons. But there is a new program. So Susan, do you want to talk to us a little bit about ABLE?
Yes, there's a really new exciting program, and in Pennsylvania it's going to open up April 3rd. In December of 2014, President Obama passed a law, Achieving a Better Life Experience, ABLE Act, that throws this program to the states. So the states could develop their own program to help people with disabilities, significant disabilities, acquired before the age of 26, to be able to save in a special savings account managed by the Pennsylvania Treasury Department. So it goes to every state's Treasury Department so that you can save and it doesn't count as an asset. So our program, which will open again April 3rd, you can save up to $14,000 a year in gifts, your income, however, up to a maximum of $100,000, and it will not count as an asset. Of course, there are qualifying expenses, such as assistive technology, so that's why we were involved in the advocacy, but housing, school-related expenses, transportation, clothing, all sorts of expenses that will help someone in school, go to a job, live in their own home. So housing and utilities are also qualified expenses. You can get more information by going to the Treasury Department's website. It's paable.gov.
That's great. I think what really is important with this is that a lot of times we tell everybody pay yourself first, set aside money for savings, and really with those individuals who are going to rely on government benefits, it's a careful analysis as to where at what point where the tipping point is, right? For individuals, and to make sure that they understand the impact of specific decisions that they might make with regards to savings.
Well, and
go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, Hillary, one of the other things I wanted to say is, so my son who has cerebral palsy, even though he was totally mainstreamed in school in regular education, he qualifies for an ABLE account. People who are blind automatically qualify. People with autism, with intellectual disabilities, with traumatic brain injury. There are some very simple diagnoses that, if a person falls in that category, will qualify. Some people who have ADHD will automatically qualify. If you are eligible for supplemental security income, if you receive it, you're automatically qualified to open up an ABLE account. So I think part of the point here is this is a new realm of financial education, of encouraging people to be able to be in charge of their own finances and be able to save safely and learn how to control your own money and your future.
Yeah, I think there's been a long-held thought that individuals with disabilities can't save because of these asset limits, but now this is opening a whole new world. It opens the doors for things like home ownership, because previously it's been very challenging to save enough for a down payment in order to purchase that home, even though the home itself doesn't count towards some of those asset limits. So it is very complex, but something that's really opening things up for folks. So let's move on to the next piece, which is disability-specific needs, and here are some questions that I think are helpful for you as a teacher to think through in terms of, whether or not your students may benefit from some adaptations to these lessons. And again, by adaptations, I don't necessarily mean the traditional ones that you would do for a student with special needs. Maybe providing a graphic organizer or note taking or other types of adaptations that you're doing for your lessons. I'm talking about literally changing the content of your lessons for students to assist them better. So, one, can the student handle their money without physical assistance? An individual who needs somebody to help them in handling their physical cash and an ATM card. It's going to have different circumstances than someone who doesn't need that assistance. Will the student be able to understand complex issues? So this goes to issues of cognitive disabilities and whether or not the student will be able to understand and process some of those more complicated issues. Is the student perhaps naive or susceptible to influence? Now, certainly there are lots of individuals without disabilities who are naive and susceptible to influence, but I think specifically of for example, individuals with Down syndrome, where that can be, a part and parcel of that disability. Does the student have a hard time being organized? We think about students with ADHD, for example, who may, have a really hard time trying to manage their just normal daily tasks and getting things done, and will that impact them in their finances with things like paying bills on time, for example? Does the student have a sensory disability, such as related to their hearing or to their vision, that might make accessing information more difficult? So, for a typical student, they can walk up to an ATM and read the information on the screen and press the numbers. That's going to be different with somebody who is has a vision impairment, for example. So those are just some of the disability-specific needs and reasons why we might differentiate or adapt our lessons. I'm going to turn over to Susan to talk about the role of personal or financial caregivers. So, Susan, you want to take over on this one?
Sure. So from some people with disabilities, of course, there are other people in their lives who are assisting them in some part or all parts of their day. So they may have someone who's going to help them with the activities of daily living, and then other people who, just because of either fine motor skills or intellectual or cognitive disabilities, are helping with paying bills, managing their accounts, or some aspect of that. So, of course, we need to recognize that there are other people in that person's life. And so what we're talking about is how to make sure that you're protected against identity theft, and how you can go on certain websites as an individual and just kind of monitor your account, or to set up systems so that you have trust. So whether it is having a maximum daily limit on your debit card, or some system you've created so that you can do transferring of money from one account to pay a bill. All of that's important. And then the other aspect of when you're teaching financial education, as you know, we're not just teaching the student, but we also have a relationship with the family. And that's critically important. When a child turns 18, they become a legal adult, as all of you know. When you're 18, it's your income only that counts for supplemental security income, SSI. Some parents may decide that they believe that their child cannot manage their own resources. And for Social Security only, they can become a representative payee. And that's a fairly simple process. But that does mean that then their now adult child is not in charge of their own money that comes from Social Security. So it's either SSI, SSDI, something like that. Or some parents are choosing to become guardians. And that means you've gone to a court and proven to the judge that their child is not competent to manage their own affairs. And that's all affairs, not just money affairs. And when that occurs, that doesn't mean that we can't expose and teach students about financial education. Just know that they're not in charge of their own money. But that doesn't stop someone from creating goals and understanding income and knowing that you can work. It just means that they're not going to be the ones responsible for paying the expenses. So I may have gone through that a little fast. I know that's of a more complicated conversation. But I think that all of us know that when we're talking about financial education, that there are values that come with money that often come from families, and that we do not, in our work, we do not believe that we can separate out these conversations.
I think those are really important. And again, these are issues that apply specifically to individuals with disabilities that, doesn't apply necessarily to your typical student. Your typical 17 or 18-year-old student is not going to be questioning whether or not, they're going to have their own legal rights of their finances when they turn 18. So, again, these are issues that are specific to students with disabilities, and around which we may choose to or might ought to amend our lessons. So let's talk also about a few of the special assistance programs, and these were in a lot of cases new to me. So I'm assuming if they're new to me, they're probably new to many of those on the line. So Susan, would you talk about these 4 programs? We mentioned the ABLE accounts already, but Could you just talk a little bit more about what these are and give us an
Sure.
101 version?
Sure. In Pennsylvania, well, it used to be in the federal government that they supported people with disabilities only in nursing homes or in institutions. Then in the 1980s, what happened is that the federal government said, we will support people with disabilities in the community. We will waive the old requirement that people be served in an institution. So Pennsylvania is rich with waivers. So many of you may know about the waivers that are administered through the Office of Developmental Programs, ODP, and those are waivers for people with intellectual disabilities, and there's one for people who have autism once they turn 21. But there is another office that has waiver programs, and that's the Office of Long-Term Living. And those waivers begin at age 18, and they can include people with autism, with people with physical disabilities and traumatic brain injuries, and there are no waiting lists whatsoever. The reason the waiver programs are important is because of the services you can get from waivers that are free to you, the participant, including health insurance, but also pre-employment and some of the transition services, so job coaches, transportation, personal assistance services, and assistive technology. So while you as a teacher are part of the team where you would provide assistive technology for a student, as you know, you're looking more holistically, and assistive technology can go way beyond educationally related, and the home and community-based waiver programs can supply that. The second one is a program that is a federal program that came to the states, and for Pennsylvania, it comes to the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation within the Department of Labor and Industry, and that's the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, WIOA. And very simply, right now, one of the things it will do for students age 14 to 21 is provide paid internships. Actually, I think it may be a little later for paid internships, so that if they have learned, research has shown, that if you have an internship or a job while you're young, the possibilities of a positive outcome of having competitive employment is much higher. So the federal government, those dollars are coming to Pennsylvania, and OVR will pay for an employer to hire a student with a disability. So that's pretty exciting. And the next one, and I hate to rush this, but I know we're going to run out of time, the Social Security work incentives. Social Security has two programs to encourage people with disabilities to take a chance and try working, knowing that you never lose by working. There are so many positive things about having a job, including self-worth, making more money, relationships, all of that. But many people are afraid of losing their government supports, whether it's waiver supports or SSI, for fear that the job will end or not work out. And these two programs will allow a person with a disability to take that risk and know that if it doesn't work out in a year or 2 years, that you can enter back into the system of receiving SSI very easily. So it's not taking quite as much of a risk. But many, many, many people do not know about the work incentives. Okay?
Great, that's fantastic. So the fifth point of consideration is about unique family considerations, and all of us when we deal with financial education, I think in some ways there also have some connection between what's going on at home, because this is a personal topic when we teach about money, and so sometimes that's encouraging our students to have conversations with their parents, asking things like how much money has been saved for them to for higher education. Sometimes it's just having some honest conversations about spending and those types of things. But with students with disabilities, we have sort of some unique family considerations, and so among those are a parent's lack of information about programs and supports. So just like the different programs that Susan was just talking about, they may be unfamiliar to many of us, and they're very likely in some cases unfamiliar to parents and to the students. And the second one is probably one of the sort of the trickiest to maneuver. Susan, you can agree with me or not on that one. But many times parents are dependent on the federal or state benefits that are tied to their students' disability. Susan, would you just explain for that, or just go into that just a little bit more for us?
Well, yes. If you're low income, your child who has a disability will be eligible for programs like SSI. And so the family, the child doesn't have to wait to be 18. So oftentimes when we're working with a family, we have learned that part of that family income is their child's SSI, and they are dependent on that to meet the family expenses. So it's all very tightly wound, and many people have budgeted well, but they're dependent on their students receiving SSI.
And what, I don't know if you could quantify a percentage, but do you find that this is something that parents openly discuss with their children, or do you find that many students are unaware of this connection?
Oh, I think most students are unaware. I also think some of this is because there are most classrooms, you're moving from one subject area to another. So that unless you have a special program on financial education, it wouldn't come up. It wouldn't be something that would naturally come up. So students are aware of it, and families are not necessarily volunteering it. And I must say, in our own family, we didn't talk about it. So that when our son turned 18, and there's paperwork online, so no one really talks to anyone. It's all submitted. It turned out someone called and talked to our son to kind of verify he had cerebral palsy. And they said, well, what are you planning to do with your money? And had I been there, I would have said, well, you're going to Edinburgh University. You're going to be helping pay for your education. But I wasn't there. And he said, buy Dave Matthews tickets. So I think, there's a whole host of conversations that are not happening. And the role of the teacher is critical, I think, because they can bring in new ideas or awarenesses that the conversations are not happening at home. Our family is a case in point.
And I think that's really connected to the third bullet there, which is questions about ongoing support. So that may be tied to government benefits, and it may be tied to just what the family, what the parents are expecting to be able to provide going forward, and what the student may be expecting. So certainly there are plenty of your typical students who are not going to fly the nest anytime soon either, because they need some help to manage and maybe build up a savings or what have you to get their own place. But these conversations are sometimes more involved in the case of students with disabilities. And then the final one is this debate over decision making, and Susan referenced this notion of representative payee and guardianship and or power of attorney previously, but I think it's worth pointing out that this can be a tricky place for educators to be involved in this conversation. And Susan, you're aware of circumstances where educators have made recommendations, or guidance counselors, right, and or special education teachers have maybe made recommendations for things like guardianship without really a clear understanding of what they were recommending. So do you want to just comment on that?
Right. Well, the main thing is that I think everyone's trying to be helpful to protect the student. Some ways of doing decision-making, such as representative payee, can change over time. Guardianship, it's really difficult. So we'll talk in a minute about our resource book, but just know that essentially guardianship is the most serious of of the way you essentially take away someone's civil rights. Because if a parent takes guardianship, that means their adult child no longer has the ability to enter into a contract for anything. They can't have a bank account. They can't have a credit card. They can't rent an apartment in their own name. They can't sign for anything. So there are other ways to protect someone in how they make decisions, but in order to reverse guardianship, what the person has to do is go before a judge and say, I was incompetent before, but now I am competent. And the standard is so high that we've never seen it happen in our 18 years of helping thousands of Pennsylvanians.
So that's really important, and I think what I was surprised by hearing was how many folks just presume guardianship or recommend guardianship without really having a full understanding of that. So we wanted to make sure that we covered that. Let's turn to the tools, sort of the how you can adjust or adapt your lessons. And I want to show everybody, this is the Pennsylvania Assistive Technology Foundation website under their in their financial education resources section. So if you go to patf.us under resources, you can search for financial, or excuse me, under what we do, you can search under financial education. But the direct place to go is actually to, and this is a brand new site. It's been recently redesigned, and a new URL. It's studymoney.us. So you can see that there at the bottom of your screen. And it will take you to the Sense and Sensibility, a Guide to Money Management website. And here you can access chapter by chapter much of the same content that's in the Sense and Sensibility Guide, and I'll show you the PDF version of that here in a moment. But here you see, for example, if you click on Chapter 1, it has the different sections, and you can go through the entire guide online. So if you have students that have access to technology and would be able to maneuver through this in a class setting or on their own, they could certainly do so using the web-based version. And here's what that looks like as you dig into it. But the other option is to use the print version, and that is available as a PDF online, and you are also able to request a limited number of hard copies. So PATF will provide one hard copy per student if a family requests that. So let me show you a little bit about what this looks like. So here in Chapter 1, let's get started, and is this booklet for you? And it dives into the difference between needs and wants. And one of the things I think is important to point out is, there's lots of areas that, perhaps don't need much, if any, adaptation. Certain things are the same regardless of whether, one has a disability or not, but other things are differentiated. And so I'll point some of that out here in a moment. Here again, an example of what this looks like in the guide format. What we are also working on right now is an educator guide to accompany this. We're over halfway through with it, and each chapter has and includes the essential questions, standards correlation to the Pennsylvania standards, background information for you, the educator, which I think is really important, teaching strategies, as well as companion slides. We've been working with a team of both financial education teachers as well as special education teachers, and these were the things that the educators told us that they would like to see. So here's an example of one of those slides. We can decide if things are a need or a want, and clothing may be the same for anyone. But here you'll see we've included a voice-activated device. So this is going to mean something different for somebody with disabilities than it does for somebody without. So we've included things that we think are more specific to students with disabilities. We also have slides in a section that talk about the impact of saving limits. We talked about asset limits before. So, in these slides, this gives you lots of that information that you can go through then and use with your students. So and this goes into even more than what we had time to talk about earlier. Here's the slide on ABLE that we talked about. And then there's also a chapter on assistive technology. So Susan's organization is dedicated to helping folks purchase assistive technologies that will help them to fulfill their daily, for their daily activities and others. So that is all part of the resources that we're providing to you, or that will be coming out soon. Also, just one more thing, the role of the educator. I think this is, some of these can be applicable in all situations, but we also have provided some assistance and some guidance there. So I think there were a couple of really specific questions about some of the SSI pieces, so I think we'll hold off on those in the interest of time. But hopefully this has opened your eyes and given you some sort of a glimpse into what it takes to adapt lessons for students with disabilities.